regarding a very wild weekend of wild card football in the NFL. There were so many games, and the last one concludes tonight with the Houston Texans taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But for now, we'll recap the previous 5 games of the wild card round, starting off with the Los Angeles Rams taking on the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Panthers had a losing record coming into this one. They won the NFC South Division, so they had the chance to host a home playoff game. Unfortunately for them, it would not result in a win, as the Rams did take this one in a very thrilling finish. You'll see a lot of these games that were played this weekend pretty much came down to the wire, and this one was the first that pretty much kicked things off, where in the regular season, Carolina did take them down 31-28, but they did not do it this time around. And Carolina, they kind of dug themselves a hole pretty early in this one. They found themselves down 14-0 in the first half, but they stormed back to took a 24-20 lead thanks to a Chuba Hubbard rushing touchdown, their running back. And then the Rams, they pretty much kind of went back and forth from there, because the Rams were set up pretty nicely after a huge Devontae Adams catch, who was back after dealing with some injuries with a concussion, where he missed the final 2 games of the regular season. And if you recall from last week's Football Friday, you'll know that getting him back was huge, because he missed 3 games this season, and he still led the entire NFL in receiving touchdowns with, I believe, 14 receiving touchdowns. So that was a huge get for him to return in the playoffs. But anyway, his huge catch set up the Rams very nicely for a 13-yard touchdown to Kyren Williams, their running back, to take a 27-24 lead. And then they forced a punt, but then unfortunately for the Rams, their punt got blocked by Carolina, which set them up at the Rams' 30-yard line. And then quarterback Bryce Young found wide receiver Ted McMillan, who was a rookie this year, had a great campaign. He caught a 16-yard pass from Bryce Young, and then Chuba ran it for 7 yards before Jalen Coker, their wide receiver for Carolina, caught a 7-yard touchdown to put them up 31-27 late in the fourth quarter. And then on the final Rams drive of the game, quarterback Matthew Stafford, who a lot of people see as the MVP frontrunner this year, was surgical. He led a 71-yard touchdown drive where he completed 6 of 7 passes. And one of those was that picture you see there, where he found tight end Colby Parkinson for a 19-yard touchdown, which he kind of sort of made an insane catch and managed to stay in bounds and then fight and dive into the end zone. And that put them up 34-31, and they would hang on to win in this one. And Stafford, like I said, he's an MVP frontrunner right now. He finished completing 24 of 42 passes for 304 yards, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. So that last drive pretty much, in my opinion, put the exclamation point on his MVP campaign. I think it's his in the bag for sure. But for Bryce Young, the quarterback for Carolina, he finished with 264 yards and 2 touchdowns, while also adding a rushing touchdown of his own. So he was pretty solid. This is their second year under Coach Dave Canales, and they have shown great signs of improvement, especially Bryce Young. He has taken a leap this year. He managed career highs across the board as a quarterback this year, so hopefully we continue to see that improvement. It's just unfortunate that their season ends here and we don't get to see any of that and see what exactly they're made of. But Jalen Coker, like I said, who had that touchdown to take the lead late, he had a career-high 9 catches for 134 yards and that touchdown. So he absolutely balled out for Carolina. The defense, unfortunately, just could not get a stop late when it mattered. And Chuba Hubbard, their running back, finished with 46 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. So they really, unfortunately, it falls on the defense in this one. I mean, you can't give up 34 points and expect to win in most cases. I feel like if you're trying to get in with a shootout with the Rams, who were the highest scoring offense this year, it's just a recipe for disaster. So the defense, whoever they play next, I believe they travel to Chicago in the divisional round. the Bears definitely need to hone in on their defense if they want to corral the Rams. But speaking of Chicago, they hosted the Green Bay Packers for their wild card round, and this one was not particularly close for most of it. Chicago was down 18 points at one point, and they stormed all the way back in the fourth quarter. They scored 25 points as a team in the fourth quarter, which is absolutely absurd. And they came back to win in a thriller. They were down 7-3 early, but unfortunately, a Caleb Williams interception led to a Jaden Reed touchdown for the Packers to put them up. And then the Bears, they found themselves at 4th and 5 on their own 32-yard line. They unfortunately did not convert, and that set up the Packers for another touchdown, this time to Romeo Doubs, to put them up 21-3 early on in this one in the first half. So the Bears were already facing a huge deficit, which is not dissimilar to the 28-3 Super Bowl, which, according to Bears coach Ben Johnson, he said they forced the team to watch that game and watch that comeback in case they found themselves in a situation like this. Obviously, it paid off for them, but still, just never what you want to be in, especially in the playoffs. You're down 21-3, and then you're going for it on your own territory and not getting it, which they did again, where it was 4th and 4 at the 37-yard line of Green Bay, and they did not convert. And then the Bears, luckily for Chicago, the Packers ended up missing a field goal, so it could have been a lot worse. But that missed field goal at least helped them keep it at bay, where it was 21-3. But then a Chicago field goal, they finally got back on the board to make it 21-6. They ended up forcing a Green Bay punt, but unfortunately another interception from Caleb Williams at the 2-yard line, right by the end zone, gives Green Bay the ball back. Fortunately for Chicago, Green Bay was not able to capitalize off of that, and then the Bears added another field goal to make it 21-9. So you're kind of within striking distance here. It's not completely out of hand. They just need to keep things up and actually put it in the end zone. And luckily, the Chicago defense forced another Green Bay punt before running back DeAndre Swift finally found the end zone to make it 21-16. So now it's a one-score game. Now it gets very, very interesting. But for Green Bay, they wouldn't really stop either offensively because Matthew Golden scored a 23-yard touchdown to extend their lead 27-16. They did end up missing the extra point, so that's why it's a little funky with the score. But for Chicago, they converted a key 4th and 8, and they found Rome Odunze for a 27-yard reception to convert that 4th down before Olamide Zaccheaus scored the touchdown and Colston Loveland converted the 2-point conversion to make it 27-24. And at this point, if you're a Green Bay, I'm sure they were very, very nervous. I mean, you were up 18 in this game, and now Chicago is pretty much all the way back here. You just got to score and then get some stops on defense, which you've been doing the whole game. But McManus for Green Bay ended up missing another field goal, and then DJ Moore for Chicago was caught a 25-yard touchdown to take the lead 31-27 with just under 2 minutes remaining. And unfortunately for Green Bay, they could not bounce back from that, and Chicago would hang on to win the game and advance to the divisional round, where they'll play the Los Angeles Rams, like I said. And for Jordan Love, I mean, he really couldn't do anything else in this one. He finished with 323 passing yards and 4 passing touchdowns, so he was pretty remarkable, although his efficiency with the completion percentage, it left a little bit to be desired, but stats-wise, yardage and touchdowns, I mean, you can't really ask much more of him. And Romeo Doubs for the Packers, who caught that touchdown, also had 8 catches for 124 yards, so he was balling out as well. And then Josh Jacobs, their running back, they really couldn't get the ground game going at all. He had 19 carries for 55 yards. It's good for only, 2.9 yards per carry, which isn't ideal in the playoffs, but they really couldn't get a whole lot going on the ground. Caleb Williams for the Bears, he kind of had a mixed bag because his volume was very high. He passed for over 40 times, but you kind of had to when you're down 18. but he finished with 361 yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions in this one. And Colston Loveland, their tight end, who is a rookie this year, had an insane debut playoff game where he had 8 catches for 137 yards. So he was pretty efficient for them in Chicago, and that was one of the things that was working for them, especially down the stretch. And the running back DeAndre Swift, he finished with 13 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown, while Kyle Monangai, their rookie running back, finished with 8 carries for 27 yards. So kind of a balanced approach for the run game. I mean, obviously you couldn't run it if you're down 18, so they kind of had to abandon that a little bit. But, pretty efficient from the running backs in this one, especially DeAndre Swift. But the Chicago Bears, they now host the Rams in the divisional matchup next round. But looking in the AFC, we have the Buffalo Bills, who traveled to Jacksonville, who won their division in the AFC South. And Buffalo coming into this game, if you saw last week's edition on Football Friday, you'll know that I talked extensively about the Bills' playoff woes, especially on the road. They had previously had an 8-game losing streak in road playoff games. And under head coach Sean McDermott and Josh Allen, they were 0-5. So it was really, really tough. There was a lot of narratives coming into this game where they're kind of cursed on the road in the playoffs, but that unfortunately was not the case for Jacksonville, where Buffalo did end that streak and they finally picked up a road win, the first of Josh Allen's career, who was the MVP last year. But this one was mind-boggling if you're a Jaguars fan, Liam Cohen, who was calling plays, you know that Buffalo, and I talked about this last week, Buffalo is horrible again when it comes to defending against the run. And the fact that their 2 main running backs, Travis Etienne and Bashaw Tutin, only had 14 carries combined, is just unacceptable, considering the fact that on those 14 carries, they ran for over 118 yards. So, I mean, that's extremely efficient, and it shows just how well the run was working against Buffalo, but they really just did not look to do that at all, and that just makes zero sense to me, and I think that's a huge reason why they ended up losing this game. But in the second quarter, Jacksonville was up 7-3 in this one, thanks to a Bryant Thomas Jr. touchdown at the goal line. But on 4th and 2, they in enemy territory in the red zone, Trevor Lawrence was trying to lunge for the first down, but in the process, his shin ended up being down right before he kind of catapulted himself across the first down marker. The Bills challenged us, of course, and were correct in that assumption. And they unfortunately turned it over on downs inside the 10-yard line. They could have possibly gone up 14-3, but that turnover on downs was very crucial as it led to a Buffalo Bills touchdown drive capped off by Josh Allen to make it 10-7. And then right before the half, Jacksonville ended up missing a field goal, so it was a 10-7 deficit for Jacksonville going into the half. But then after a couple of field goals from both teams, it was 13-10, and the fourth quarter was absolutely insane. It had 4 different lead changes, which is tied for most in NFL playoff history in the fourth quarter, which is pretty crazy. And it all started with Parker Washington for Jacksonville scoring a touchdown to make it 17-13. And then the Bills came down and drive and found Dalton Kincaid, their tight end, to make it 20-17. And then the running back for Jacksonville, Travis Etienne, he scored again to make it 24-20. But then Josh Allen scored it himself again to make it 27-24. And that would end up being the final score, as whenever Jacksonville got the ball with under 2 minutes to go, the very first play, the Trevor Lawrence stepped back to pass and threw it. It got tipped, and then Buffalo came down with the interception to pretty much seal the game. And these first 3 games were pretty insane in terms of all of them coming down to the wire, because all 3 of them, the team that was leading under 2 minutes ended up losing in all 3 games, which is pretty insane to have all these comebacks and game-winning or go-ahead drives. That was a real treat for NFL fans. That was very, very entertaining football for sure. Buffalo, for them, they will now travel to Denver on the road because they are the 6th seed, And since they are the lowest remaining seed, that's who Denver, who got the number 1 seed and the bye, gets to play next round. And they get to host them, and the playoffs essentially go through them since they are the number 1 seed. So very, very tightly contested game. That will be a must-watch for sure for all football fans. Looking to the NFC, we had the San Francisco 49ers traveling to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles in a very, very heated matchup because these two teams really do not like each other, much like the Bears and Packers. But this was kind of an okay game compared to the other ones. The Eagles did have a chance to kind of take the lead at the end, but unfortunately did not. But going from the start of this game, these two teams traded touchdowns to start, where Demarcus Robinson scored a touchdown for San Fran before Dallas Goedert, their tight end for the Eagles, ended up scoring. They did miss the extra point. That's why it was 7-6 early on. But those two drives were set up by huge chunk plays from each team, where Demarcus Robinson, who did catch that touchdown, ended up having a 61-yard haul early on in that drive, which set them up for the touchdown. Meanwhile, for Philadelphia, Saquon Barkley, their running back, broke off for a 29-yard run to set them up in very good position, and that capped off by the Goedert touchdown. And then Goedert scored again to make it 13-7 with the Philadelphia in the lead. And then some field goals made it 13-3 at halftime, where Philly took that lead into the break. And then they opened the third quarter with another field goal to make it 16-10. So they were leading in the second half, but then that's when things kind of started to fall apart for them. Because in the fourth quarter, Brock Purdy found Kyle Juszczyk, the fullback, for a 27-yard catch. And then they ran a trick play where wide receiver Jawan Jennings passed it to running back Christian McCaffrey to make it 17-16 for a 29-yard touchdown, which is pretty remarkable. They were able to pull that off. As you recall, in the Super Bowl against the Patriots, I know I do, with the Philly special where they ran that trick play and it worked to perfection. I'm pretty sure they have a statue of it or something now, but it's pretty ironic for them to have it called against them in this one. But a Purdy interception, Brock Purdy, their quarterback for the 49ers, set up Philadelphia for another field goal to make it 19-17, so they were hanging on to a 2-point lead. But then Christian McCaffrey for San Fran scored again to make it 23-19 in this one. And then the Eagles, they found themselves driving down the field on the last possession, and they had it 1st and 10 on the 49ers' 20-yard line. So they were right in the red zone with a minute and a half remaining. So plenty of time to score. You'd think almost too much time, right? You'd think certainly they'd get some points out of this. But unfortunately, a sack and then 3 incompletions led to a turnover on downs, and that let San Fran hang on to win. And this is crazy because if you look at the NFC West division, 3 of the 4 remaining NFC teams are from that division. And for San Fran, they now head to Seattle, who is the number 1 seed in the NFC in the divisional round. That's going to be a huge matchup, another divisional rivalry. That's going to certainly be one not to miss. So I cannot wait for that one. But looking at the last slate of the weekend before tonight's game in the AFC, we don't know who the winner of this one will play yet because Texans and the Steelers still have to play. But the Los Angeles Chargers headed to New England to face the Patriots. And the Patriots did end up picking up the win, thank goodness. I was really, really nervous about this one, honestly, because it's quarterback Drake May's first ever playoff appearance. And he was pretty solid for the most part, aside from a few mistakes. He did have 2 turnovers in this one. So we obviously could have played a lot better. But for the Patriots, this is their first playoff win since the 2018 Super Bowl. So it has been a long time coming since they picked up their first win under a new regime, under a new head coach with head coach Mike Vrabel, ushering in a new era of Patriots football with Drake May. But Andy Borregales for the Patriots, their kicker, was probably the real hero of the offense, at least, because he ended up having 3 field goals, so he accounted for most of their points because they ended up winning 16-3 in this one. but the defense was absolutely relentless in this one where they got to Justin Herbert, the quarterback for the Chargers. They ended up sacking him 6 times in this one, so they were all over the field. They held the Chargers to just 207 total yards of offense, so they were everywhere you could ask them to be all game long. As for Drake May, he ended up finishing with 17 of 29 passes completed for 268 yards passing and added 66 rushing yards, which led the team. So they really couldn't do anything on the ground. But unfortunately, he did have that interception and a fumble lost. But luckily for the Patriots, the Chargers could not capitalize on that, and it's a huge credit to the defense. Like I said, they were everywhere and pretty much held the Chargers in check. So it wasn't really close at any point once the Patriots ended up scoring a touchdown. And now New England, for them, again, they get to host the winner of the Texans or Steelers game tonight. I think it'll probably end up being Houston, if I had to guess. I mean, their defense is just ridiculous, which makes me nervous for the Patriots, especially if they get to play them next round. I mean, Houston could realistically sack Drake May 6 times in that one, so the offensive line really needs to protect him if they want to face him, if they end up facing the Houston Texans, which I could be wrong. Pittsburgh could shock people. They did in the last game of the regular season, but I do expect Houston to win in this one.